Hello there. The cat is now truly out of the bag, and labelling concerned citizens as far right when they question mass inward migration will no longer silence them. For decades now, our politicians have put in train policy after policy designed to take the British nation with its Christian heritage and turn it into some sort of garbled hodgepodge of unrecognisable multiculturalism. But it was designed to be done to us, the mere little people, without our consent. But it was never intended to impinge on the high and mighty, like our politicians. But when you read headlines like this in the Mail regarding a meeting between Keir Starmer and Lindsay Hoyle just before the events of Tuesday exploded in their faces, how Labour leader shocked the Speaker by barging into his tiny room as Sue Gray lurked nearby, and Mail on Sunday commentator Dan Hodges tweeting, "I spoke to an MP yesterday who told me he had weighed up his own physical safety when deciding on how to vote on yesterday's Gaza motion. We have crossed a line now. We are not a properly functioning democracy if this is a factor in how our elected representatives act." And you get the idea from that things might have all changed. And former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has written a damning piece in the Telegraph saying that members of a certain demographic are now bullying Britain into submission. But at least she does go on to say that this isn't just about my colleagues in Parliament. Our values and freedoms are under attack in all walks of life. However, the current Home Secretary, James Cleverly, is saying she's wrong, that all is sweetness and light. No help from that quarter then. And here's what Tory MP Robert Jenrick said on the floor of the House yesterday. Oh, and I'll explain why I bleep out some of his words afterwards.
The real issue of the events of the last 24 hours is not the party political shenanigans suggested by the shadow leader of the House. The real issue is that this House appears cowed by threats of violence and intimidation. The Mother of Parliaments appears weakened and diminished as a result. We have allowed our streets to be dominated by extremists and British Jews and others to be too intimidated to walk through central London week after week. And now we're allowing extremists to intimidate British members of Parliament. This is wrong. It has to stop. Would my right honourable friend organise a debate on extremism and how we tackle this challenge, which is one of the central issues facing our generation?
Now, many people will be frustrated that I've bleeped out the references made to a certain demographic, and that I don't refer directly to it myself either. But I am future-proofing myself against the threat of a probable Labour government. A Labour government that I believe would further legislate to protect its now preferred demographic from criticism. I believe we'll see blasphemy laws by the back door, with social media in the UK being targeted. Anyway, all these words that our politicians are starting to spout are not yet being backed with actions, because we out here all know what actions need to be taken. But we cannot air this truth given the now thoroughly woke state of the UK legal system, from the police to the lawyers to the judges. Our politicians oversaw all that happening and did nothing to stop it. And all the while they talked of diversity is our strength, when what they really meant was we'll rub their noses in diversity. Words attributed to Blairism that were eagerly taken up by first the Lib Dem Tory coalition and then the Tory government. Oh yes, eagerly taken up. followed by all those moves to bring in so-called anti-hate speech laws to stifle all dissent. These have been the actions of our politicians, imposing these things on the ordinary folk of the land, and they did so with vigour and relish. They wallowed in their own wokeness while they pontificated in those hallowed halls of Westminster about how awfully racist Britain was. And whenever an atrocity occurred, the first cry that went out from the establishment was that the far right must be crushed because it somehow must be their fault, when what they really meant was, stop ordinary people getting out of hand or they might do the job the government should be doing. And we can't have that sort of unrest, can we? Our politicians were numb and dumb as statues were pulled down and our heritage was openly attacked. They've sat there inert on the red and green benches as our history was rewritten to airbrush our heroes out of existence or vilify them for any tenuous link to slavery from hundreds of years ago that they could find. They were happy to see historical novels being rewritten and our historical figures being recast as non-white. And instead of robustly defending the UK, its people and our way of life, they cravenly accepted it all, and many of them even applauded it. Some joined in. All to appease minorities. Minorities that terrify them more than the ballot box does. They couldn't even properly defend Remembrance Day last year. And now we hear that the bosses of the armed forces want to remove the Christian element of future remembrance events and reduce security checks to get more foreign-born non-white people into the armed forces, with the real aim being to keep white people out of the armed forces. His Majesty's armed forces, remember, not the government's. And how long before the innocence of children singing carols in their neighbourhood at Christmas is banned for fear of offending? Will a Starmer government see the end of church bells ringing proudly out on Sundays and weddings? After all, our politicians have already allowed Christmas to be almost totally converted to Winterval and Easter to be eradicated, haven't they? But festivals for other religions are pushed by the politicians for all they are worth. And a certain demographic is allowed to even block roads while they pray in public. And don't get me started with their antics at Speaker's Corner. Our politicians have overseen all of this. They have even praised it, or ignored it because it never directly affected them. They have even mobilised the police forces of the land against the ordinary people in favour of these vociferous and potentially violent minorities. And anyone with a dissenting or questioning voice was instantly labelled as a far-right racist to be hounded out of polite society or arrested. But has all this changed after Tuesday's debacle in the House of Commons, where it has been admitted that MPs are now basically dictated to by threats of violence on them or their families from interests outside the House? No, is my short answer. We will see the flight of any good people left in Parliament, bullied out by the threats of violence, to be replaced by, well, people of questionable loyalty to this country. And Starmer will legislate to consolidate it by opening up the voting franchise to all, for one. And do you really think that it's just this one parliamentary session that has been influenced by this? I don't, and I don't think it'll be the last either, not by a long chalk. Yes, those politicians that now complain about not feeling safe are the same ones that put the train in motion in the first place, or were content to see it chugging along on their watch. I have no sympathy for them, and I do not want to see money wasted on their security. Security that can also then be used against the far right in future, can't it? Those politicians are now hoist by their own petard. If they want to once again feel safe, then they are the ones that must take the tough decisions that will make us all safer. They know in their hearts and minds what needs to be done. It is up to them to have that tough debate and vote with courage to sort this out. They wanted the job, after all. But this is now a rump government with zero drive and just about ready to throw the towel in and hand the reins meekly over to Labour. I fear the ballot box can no longer protect us.